All right, 1 minute late. Sorry about that. Okay, today is November 1st. It is 7 p.m. This is the school board meeting for Riverside School District 96. Kathy, can you call the roll?
Okay. Mr. Barhol?
Here.
Mr. Hunt?
Here.
Ms. Claps?
Here.
Ms. Gunn?
Here.
And Mr. Muirhead?
Here.
Quorum is present.
All right. Do we have any public comment?
We do not.
Okay, then pass it over to Principal Gorman for a welcome to Blythe Park.
Hello, board members. Welcome to Blythe Park. Welcome to our newly renovated space. On behalf of our entire staff, I'd just like to thank you sincerely for the renovations that have been completed on this on our building. It's just it's been wonderful to finally become a true two-section school. So the renovated space, not only it's like bright and cheerful and engaging for students and just our larger student population in general, but it also has promoted just more collaborative practices among our teachers. So just recently, Hollywood and Blythe Park teachers have decided they're coming together for some of their after-school professional development sessions. And so this space has just offered a really nice opportunity for teachers to engage in those professional conversations. So I just wanted to thank you for the renovated space and welcome you once again to Blythe Park. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so we will move into committee reports, and we'll, Stephanie, I'll have you jump off with policy.
Yes, I'm so bummed I'm not there in person to see the space. I've been really excited to get into Blythe Park, so I might have to do a one-off visit at some point that's convenient for others. So it's not, this isn't, kind of exactly policy in terms of press, although Press 113 is officially out, I think as of yesterday or today, so I will begin taking a look through those. I think our hope is to bring it to the December CAL, Martha, is I believe what the email had referenced.
Yeah, we can, although there's some training webinars, if we want to wait longer, we could wait until December board, so we'll decide. You can decide.
Okay, yeah, so soon to come. Sorry, I just
Yeah.
changed my mic. This is probably better. So more to come on that, but Press 113 is officially out. I'm attending the Zoom webinar that ISB puts on in early December. But I think we thought that the resolutions coming up for the conference in November just made sense under a policy based on a delegate representative from our district casting votes in regards to the resolutions. And there are only 5, so it is far fewer than there were last year. So I'm not sure if people have had an opportunity to read through them and are generally aligned or in consensus with the bottom line recommendation from the resolution committee to either adopt or not adopt. My recollection from last year is the resolutions where the committee recommends do not adopt don't come before the delegate assembly unless they have been properly appealed by the school district that submitted them. I think last year that was the only one that we differed from the committee, but we didn't even get to voice our differing opinion because it never even came up because the school district had not appealed it. So really of the 5, it's possible that far fewer even come for a vote. So it's just kind of like background. And I'm not sure if, again, sort of if I've de facto become the delegate because I did it last year, that's totally fine. I have no problem doing it again. I just didn't know if anybody else who was perhaps attending the conference was interested in the role of the delegate assembly.
I was somewhat considering it, but I can talk to you more.
Okay, well, it doesn't matter who at this point,
Yeah.
whether, in discussing these 5, we can figure out who's going to ultimately kind of cast the district's votes if that's the direction we want to go in. But I don't know if anybody has suggestions on best way, like should we just take it one at a time? Or is there anybody, I guess, that has opinions where they might differ from the committee's, from the resolution committee's recommendation?
Personally, I read through it and the rationale where the committee was recommending against adoption, the rationale I felt was sound. I really didn't have any differences with any of their recommendations this time around.
Yeah, same.
Same for me as well.
So move
So
forward.
that's 5. So we'll vote in accordance to the recommendations, but if I'm understanding you correctly, Stephanie, only 2 of these are recommended to adopt. So they're only going to bring these 2 up, and the other ones will not be brought up unless the proposing district files a, what did you call it, a appeal?
Yeah, that's my, again, recollection, but last year there were far more.
Yeah.
And then there's some that just won't even make it, but they include it in this packet per their resolution procedures, where they still make it into, like, they're still distributed essentially to the active members, but some, you'll see those noted below. But yes, that has been my recollection. But I guess if a school does appeal it and it comes before the delegate assembly, they'll have an opportunity to make a statement, make a position statement, argument, but we would then, I guess, potentially cast a do not recommend vote, or no vote on that resolution.
Yeah, no, I think actually if you look at page, I guess I'm not sure what page it is of the
Second to
PDF.
last, yeah.
It does have boxes where our board can agree or disagree, and then it has the recommendation after the resolution title. So in that case, it seems like we probably do vote on each of them. Otherwise, why have the check boxes? But
Yeah, it's again, that's just how I remember it being. And then I'm trying to see so they used the consent, last year they used a consent agenda to any that were to adopt. So if you're looking at the delegate assembly business rules, number 7 says like consent agenda is used to expedite. Again, I'm not sure that they're going to need that this time. So any that were due adopt by the resolutions committee last year did appear on a consent agenda. And then if you see appeals, it says those wishing to appeal do not adopt, have a process by which to do so, and they shall receive a period of time not to exceed 5 minutes in which to explain why it should be considered by the delegate assembly. Appeals should only be accepted from the submitter, blah, blah. So that's what I was saying is like the school needs to get up and say, if the recommendations do not adopt, then that district that proposed it needs to technically appeal it, and then you can vote on it.
that makes sense.
I think we can, if I understand it correctly, I mean, we have up until the moment you click the button or check the box to figure out who's actually going to do it. It just has to be one of us. We can't be multiple of us. So I know
it could be one of us. I'm not sure if Kathy last year had to register the delegate, because you do go and get this
okay.
like Willy Wonka golden ticket type thing and a pin, and you enter into this room, you have to give them your kind of credentials and show them your pin that you're allowed to. So I don't know, Kathy might recall if we need to pre-register our delegate.
Kathy's nodding, yes.
I believe that she was delineated as the delegate.
Okay. And that kind of makes sense. I was reading through it and they were talking about credentials and stuff, and I couldn't quite figure out what that meant. So the way you're explaining it actually makes a lot more sense. So, okay.
Willy Wonka's golden ticket is a credential, from what I recall.
Doesn't bother me who
so-
the delegate is. I'm planning on going. I think, Joel, it sounds like you're going. Stephanie, I knew you were going. I'm trying to think back. I listened to the last meeting and it sounded like, Selena, you were not going to attend. And then was Dave gonna go? You were considering it, but you might have a conflict. I don't know, were you thinking about going or
It's looking more likely I'll have a conflict.
conflict? Okay, and then, I don't remember what Dave said, I feel
I
like.
don't either, but Kathy, you could double check with everybody and then
Yeah.
do the registration.
So we'll just make sure everybody
Although
gets registered.
people have to
and-
register themselves because you sign up for all your sessions. Is that how it works? The district will pay them.
On the IASB roster,
Okay.
sign everybody up. It's more, you know, if they wanna do workshops or anything outside of the regular agenda, then they need to let me know, but.
Oh, yeah, there's some that show like an additional fee,
Mm-hmm.
some of the sessions.
Okay, so we can work with Kathy for the registration
Yep.
piece of it. Okay,
Yep.
we can do that via email.
But it sounds like whomever's casting the vote, we right now, based on the 5 that could potentially come forth, we know for sure 2, possibly up to the 5. We are aligned with the ultimate recommendation.
Yep. And I doubt it'll happen, but I was reading the
voting?
the appeals thing. So if somebody does appeal it, I don't remember what it was. One of these resolutions that they're not bringing forward was mail-in voting. And it said they do not want to do that because it doesn't give delegates an opportunity to hear the arguments live and then possibly change their mind. So just to get ahead of that, is there any opportunity or is there anything you can think of that would change any of our minds? I guess collectively, 4 of us would have to change our mind. So I don't know how that all works, but I don't think to me, there wasn't anything in here that, I mean, like Dan said, everything made sense why they were recommending to adopt or not, so.
And I know why the industrial one came up.
Yeah.
And leaving it at a local control is probably smart, because that's a zoning issue really. And then the bus driver one is the other one that I kind of thought about. And as much as I'd like to see more rigorous training for anybody who's driving a school bus, I can understand where requiring a nationally certified person and they're not really available in your county could make things a little difficult, so that's just my way of saying if there was more that was explained to defend those positions, could make me rethink, but reservations and accept what the recommendations are.
I would say personally too, that given how little this district utilizes busing services, that it's almost like an imposition if we're putting this on other districts who do utilize it much more than we would.
Yeah, that's how I was thinking about it, Dan. This isn't a big impact to us, and I don't want to hold up other people.
It's no impact, but it just poorly chosen drivers and kids doesn't exactly give me good vibes either.
It's definitely a risk. Okay, so we'll work with Kathy on registering a delegate, and right now, we are going to vote in accordance to the ISB E or A. Which one are we at here?
Recommendation.
IASB. We're going to vote for their recommendations, and that part is settled. So we'll figure out the attendance piece via email with Kathy.
Okay,
All right.
thank you. I don't know if there's anything else on this, but sounds like we've wrapped it up.
I think we're good.
Thanks.
Thank you, Stephanie. All right. Ms. Kalick is not here tonight, but we are going to talk about student achievement reports.
Yeah.
So I'll invite Angela up, and maybe, I don't know if Nora coming too, or just
No,
Angela?
just Angela.
Okay. Invite Angela.
But we have the team here to, even though they've heard some preview of it all, they've had a chance to dig in.
Good evening. Caught me too.
All right, we are going to talk about student achievement, mostly from the 22-23 school year. For our conversation tonight, we're going to talk about MAP growth and achievement, IAR achievement, the equity journey continuum, state report card, celebrating successes, further areas for growth, and then talk about some next steps. It's important for us to look at both MAP growth and achievement as well as IAR for a few reasons. We want to triangulate the data that we have and see if one assessment verifies the story of another assessment. So it's good to look at multiple assessments so that if you're seeing students or our students aren't doing well in one subject area, if that's consistent across assessments, then we know that that is a consistent story that we need to address. But if it's not consistent across assessments, then we know that we need to look at the assessments we're using and see where the concerns might be. So we look at multiple sources of data so that we're able to see if the story is consistent across those pieces of data. Another reason why we look at both MAP and IAR is because IAR is once a year. And so we're able to see how we're doing on state standards compared to other schools in the state. But we take that assessment in the spring, and then we get the data, hopefully, by the end of the school year. But by then, those students are about to move out of that classroom, out of that grade, and they're going to move on to the next grade. So it's really looking at, one, how those students might have grown from year to year, but two, how our instruction is working with our state standards. Where MAP is done 3 times a year, fall, winter, and spring. So we're able to look at how our students are growing throughout the school year, if we're on target for student growth, and adjusting our instruction on the spot for the data that we're getting from our MAP assessments. MAP also provides a projected proficiency score, which is correlated to the IAR. So we're able to look at our MAP data there too and see where are students projected to score on the IAR based off their fall RIT score, their winter RIT score, and then their spring will project for the following year. So there's pieces of data within the MAP that also works with IAR as well. And then we continue to look at MAP growth and achievement because MAP growth is a KPI for our strategic plan as well. So we'll start with our MAP data. We are going to look at 6 slides coming up. They're going to look at the fall to spring reading and math growth by grade level. They'll look at the spring reading achievement by grade level. And then we'll look at the cohort achievement for reading and math based off of the fall scores of each cohort. So this first graph is our fall to spring reading growth for the 22-23 school year by grade level. And so what you're looking at is how a grade level has done over the course of 6 years. You might see 4 or 5 bars. You'll see 5 bars for all grade levels except for second, and that's because the 2019-2020 bar, the yellow bar, is missing because that was the year that the pandemic happened, and we didn't take a MAP assessment in spring, so we weren't able to look at fall to spring growth that year. And then in second grade, you'll see that it has 4 bars, not 5, because the year following the pandemic, 2021 year, we did not have our second graders test on MAP because we were in the hybrid remote system. And second graders had iPads at home, but you have to do MAP testing on a Chromebook, so they didn't have the proper devices for the remote students to be able to take the MAP test the way 3rd through 8th grade was prepared. So then you can see how a grade level has performed over the course of time. But for the 22-23 school year, that's going to be that last bar, which is green. And then the purple line at each of those green bars is telling you what MAP projected the average growth for that grade level should have been. And we want our students to meet or exceed that projected growth line. And so you can see here that every grade level has met or exceeded the projected growth for the fall to spring growth of 22-23. What that projected growth will do, though, is it ensure if you meet your projected growth, then you'll continue at that achievement level you're at. So if I'm achieving at a 68th percentile and I meet my growth target, then I'm going to keep achieving at a 68th percentile. So we want to actually exceed our growth projection so that we can increase our achievement as well. So you see that we're meeting the growth projection at different grade levels, and we're exceeding at other grade levels, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So this is our reading from fall to spring. And then this is the same graph, but for math. And the growth is talked about in RIT points. So students get a RIT score. A RIT score of a 258 is a 258 no matter what grade level a student is at. It's just that will determine what their percentile is based off of students at that grade level for them. So I could get a 257 in second grade, and that might be a high percentile based off of other second graders, but as I get older, that 257 is going to become a lower achievement percentile because as I get older, I should be performing higher. This graph shows the spring reading achievement for the 22-23 school year. So in the spring, when we took the MAP test, this is the achievement level, different from growth. This is the percentile that the students are performing at, and this is the mean percentile for the grade level. And so you can see how second graders have performed in our district over time, 3rd, 4th, 5th through 8th, starting with the 2017-18 year, going to the 2022-23 year. Same explanation for the yellow bar missing at every grade level, and same explanation for second grade only having 4 bars. And so with this graph, you can see that we are in reading achievement based off of our spring data. We are working towards increasing our achievement levels. We have some grade levels that are increasing from last year. We have some grade levels whose achievement levels may have gone down some. And so we as administrators continue to look at the standards, look at what we're assessing in MAP, look at what areas are showing room for growth, whether it's literacy or whether it's vocabulary or informational text, and we continue then to work with that at those grade levels. So that's reading, and then this is math. And you can see that most elementary achievement levels on math grew or maintained from their previous year. And that's important to look at the elementary level because, as you know, this is our second year of iReady Mathematics. So last year was the first year. And sometimes when you're implementing a new program, as you're getting used to the program, the routines, the structure, the scope and sequence, sometimes schools might see a dip in scores. We did not see that, so it shows that our students are responding to the instruction of the new elementary math curriculum. This graph shows us the fall reading achievement by cohort. So this is looking at students within a grade. So I'll look at 8th grade to talk a little bit more about it. If you look at 8th grade, you have there 7 bars. And what that's showing you is the furthest bar to the right is this fall when they were in 8th grade. The one before it is when they were in 7th grade in the fall, then 6th, then 5th, 4th, 3rd, and 2nd. So you can see how cohorts are performing, how they perform from their 2nd grade year of testing through the grade that they are currently in. And again, talking about that RIT score, you're going to want them to their RIT score to increase so that their achievement percentile is increasing, because as they're getting older, we want them to perform higher as they continue to grow. So there is room for growth, as you can see, at some of our grade levels, and then you can see our 2nd, 3rd, and 5th grade groups are continuing to grow as we would expect. It is important to note that our 4th and 5th graders were kindergartners and 1st graders when the pandemic hit. Our junior high students were 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders. So they were at a time where a lot of the developmental pieces were being taught. The pandemic hit them at a time when they were working on some of those earlier social emotional learning skills, as well as earlier reading foundational skills. You'll see from math, earlier literary skills. And so when you think about elementary students who, one, lost a third of their instruction when the pandemic first hit, and we were working on what remote instruction looked like across the nation, and then the second year where some students were still learning remotely while others were learning in a hybrid fashion, it is the 6th and 7th and 8th graders who were greatly impacted. And then this is the cohort data for math. So that's our MAP data. Now we'll talk about IAR. And I forgot to mention at the beginning of this presentation, the slides you have have been updated as recently as today. So they're, if you're going out of board book, those slides should match here. But if you're looking at something you might have downloaded, they might be slightly different. And the differences come about right now. So that's what made
And there's
you
some,
remember.
there are clarification pieces, they're really not changing data pieces or anything.
Thank you, yes. So for our data, we're gonna look at geographic peers and lookalike peers. We're gonna look at our geographic peers and lookalike peers for our proficiency in ELA, math, and science. And proficiency is the equivalent of achievement in MAP. So we're looking at like percent of students who met or exceeded their standards. When we talk about geographic peers, we're talking about the West Suburban Consortium for Academic Excellence districts, our WSCE districts. Those districts come from Cook and DuPage County. Their school enrollments range from 434 to 5,564. You'll notice in the red parentheses, it says 1,581. The red parentheses are the numbers for Riverside, District 96.
So that's the one that got added.
Yes, that's one of the things that got added, as well as that asterisk there. We just wanted to note that this data is coming from the 2021 enrollment data. So that's why the numbers look slightly off. If you'll remember, that is the hybrid remote year. So our numbers were slightly off from what we regularly have as our student enrollment. That's why that number might seem a little bit lower. Our per pupil expenditure ranges in our geographic peers ranges from 11,500 to about 25,000, with us being at 16,005. Our per pupil instructional expenditures range from about 6,000 to about 12,000, with us being at 9,291. And you'll notice the average low income ranges. The average low income range is from 0% to 58% within our geographic peers. So it's quite a large range when we're looking at how districts are doing compared to how we're doing compared to other districts. And our low income range, or our low income number, is 19.4%. So when we first started looking at geographic peers, and we did notice these large ranges from enrollment and diversity with the low income numbers, we wanted to see how are we doing compared to districts that are structured like us, have a similar population as us, have a similar low income range or low income percentage as us, spend around the same amount of money as us. And so we call that our lookalike peers. And there's a search that's done in the school data where it can pull up lookalike peers based on criteria you give. So we'll see how we compare to lookalike peers, which are peers that we have that have a student enrollment range from 1,034 to 2,172. Per pupil expenditures between 14,900 and 17,000. Per pupil instructional expenditures between about 8,000 and 9,500. And that where the average low income range is between 12.6 and 28.8. So bringing that range a little bit closer. And these lookalike peers come from Cook, DuPage, Lake, McHenry, and Will County. And just a reminder who our WSCE districts are when we're talking about geographical peers. These are the districts in our WSCE group. Brookfield-LaGrange Park School District 95 is not part of the WSCE group, but we add them in when we talk about comparisons because they are one of the feeder schools for Riverside Brookfield High School. So we want to make sure we are also looking at how we compare with the other feeder schools. So we'll be compared to, there's 16 schools that we look at total, including us. So this first chart is a geographic peers comparison for IAR proficiency on ELA. The red line you see is a reference line that is equivalent to our spring 2022 score on the IAR and ELA. And that spring, what did I say?
You said 22. You mean
23.
Right.
I mean the one we just took.
Yeah.
Spring 2023 score. And that line is at 63.7%. So we had 63.7% of all the students, 3rd through 8th, who took the ELA assessment, who met or exceeded the ELA standards. So that's what the red line is. And then you can see how we compare to all the other districts by just comparing their blue line, that last bar, to that red line. That red line's there just to make it easier for the comparison. And we fall about in the middle of the WSCE districts for our IAR proficiency in ELA. where when we compare it to our lookalike peers, the red line is going to be the same thing each time. It's going to represent our spring 2023 score. So when you compare us to the whiskey districts at 63.7% for ELA proficiency, or not whiskey districts, the lookalike districts, we're second among those lookalike peers. So when we start looking at districts that spend like us, have a student population like us, have a low income ratio like us, you are starting to see that we are actually at the higher end then of the performance in ELA. Then we have our geographical peer comparison for math. Again, we're right about in the middle with 57.1% of our students meeting or exceeding IAR standards in math, 3rd through 8th grade. And then compared to our lookalike peers, we are at the top with that 57.1% of our students meeting or exceeding in math standards. So our math is lower than our ELA. And if you recall from the spring, when we look at our strategic plan report card, we didn't meet the KPI for math on IAR, but that's because we set a goal for 64% of our students meeting or exceeding in math. So we didn't make that 64%, but when you look at the graphs, you can see that our math is still growing. We are still increasing our math achievement. We just didn't quite hit the bar that was set last year. So we're going to reset the bar, and we're going to work towards that 64% again. For science, this is our geographical peer comparison. We are again right around the middle of our geographical peers with 70.2% of our students in 5th and 8th grade meeting or exceeding science standards. Because in science, the assessment is only given in 5th grade and then in 8th grade. And then compared to our lookalike peers, we are 3rd compared to our lookalike peers. Another part of our state report card, besides IAR proficiency, and then also there are many parts to our state report card, but one of them is also the equity journey continuum. And we started talking about this last year when the state started this last year. And if you remember, the data that they used last year was from the 2018-19 school year. For the equity journey continuum, the state uses data that's already public. So they don't use the embargoed data because they want to have the information out right away, not wait for it to be unembargoed for schools to look at it. So the equity journey continuum data is always a year behind. They couldn't last year use the data from 21-22 because there wasn't some of the data there based off of the pandemic. And then there wasn't data from 2021 because nobody took an assessment that year. So that's why they went back to 2018-19. So the dark blue bar is 2018-19. The lighter blue bar is 2021-22 data. You can see that the 3 components of the equity journey continuum are student learning, learning conditions, and elevating educators. And you'll notice that with student learning, we've moved from moderate gaps in equity to large gaps in equity. I need to back up. The equity journey continuum is a tool that the state is using to help districts track their progress towards closing gaps in student achievement opportunities. And for us, that supports one of our strategies in Goal 1. So going back to that student learning data, we're seeing that we've moved from moderate gaps in student learning to large gaps. And what that student learning is comprised of is the Kindergarten Individual Developmental Survey. And that's a survey that kindergarten students, kindergarten teachers observe kindergarten student behaviors and actions and learning to give them a rating based on math, ELA, social emotional, and one other area that I can't remember off the top of my head. And what happens with the equity journey continuum is a certain percentage of students have to have a score, and then they'll look at the gaps in those scores. But if you don't have that score, you automatically get a 1.0, which is large gaps. And we didn't, in 21-22, have enough scores for all of our students to meet the percentage benchmark. So they didn't even look at our gaps because there were some students that didn't have a rating. Maybe they were not an English speaker, and so teachers weren't able to rate some of their indicators because the students weren't able to talk about the things that they were learning about. Or might have been, I think that year we had a student that had come towards the end of the marking period, and we didn't know at that time that we still had to mark them for all the indicators, and so we didn't mark them for all, and we got dinged for that as well. So we learned actually that year some of the intricacies of the Kindergarten Individual Developmental Survey, and we are much better about it now. So when we look at our data from even the 22-23 school year on next year's Equity Journey report, or when we look at the next year's Equity Journey report, we should be better in that Kindergarten Individual Developmental Survey piece. Another thing that impacted the student learning area is that we saw a decline in what's called the special populations group. So the gaps are compared between special populations and non-special populations. And the special populations are a combination of our EL students, our free and reduced students, and our children with disabilities. So they compare the performance of the special population group to the non-special population group. And then they also compare white students to all other races and ethnicities. And so they're looking at the gaps between those two groups. And what happened between the 2019 school year and the 2022 school year is that we saw a decline in our special populations group between those 2 years in both reading and math. So that also brought our student learning goal down. But one of the successes that we had is that another piece of student learning is our English learners' progress towards proficiency. So every year our English learners have to take what's called the access test. And we're looking to see that they are achieving, they're making projected progress towards being proficient in academic English language. And so we, for that, actually scored at a 4.0 with minimal gaps for the 22 school year. And then the final thing that impacted our student learning is 8th graders passing Algebra 1 and 8th graders enrolled in Algebra 1. And again, it's looking at gaps. So it's looking at what's the representation in your students who are able to access Algebra 1. And in Riverside, students who access Algebra 1 are students in our advanced learning in 8th grade. Our advanced 8th grade learning class teaches Algebra 1, which is a high school course, a 9th grade course, 9th grade standards, and the state's looking at how are districts providing access to 8th graders on 9th grade standards. So for us, and we've talked about this sometimes at the table a few times in the past, and we'll continue to talk about it, for us, it's looking at how our advanced learning program, students are identified for advanced learning program. And we're going to need to address that. We're going to need to look at that because we need to make it more accessible for our students. Right now, it's very test-based, test-driven. You have to qualify by reaching certain criteria on either MAP, a cognitive test, and or an end-of-the-year standards-based test. So to access our advanced learning programming, it's all test-based. And that is not producing results that are very diverse within our advanced learning program. And so we are now at a point where it's coming up on our state report card and it's coming up on our equity journey continuum. You can see with the learning conditions that we improved from 2019. Just a couple of things that helped that improvement were our 5 Essential survey, looking at the supportive environment ratings that we had on our 5 Essential survey, as well as the looking at our student participation, our parent participation, our staff participation is very good. Our parent participation is usually around 20 to 35%. And that gives us, I believe, it puts us in moderate gaps. To get to small gaps, just for reference, we'd have to have at least 50% of our parents participate in the 5 Essentials survey. Now, one of the things we've talked about as administrative team is the way the state looks at parents and looks at the percentage is for every student in the district, the parents have to take a survey. So if I have 2 kids in the district and I take the survey once, I'm only taking 50% of what I'm supposed to take for the district. So if we're ever gonna get to that 50% or higher, parents are gonna have to start taking the 5 essential multiple times. And I'm sure most of you have taken the 5 essentials, and I don't know if you want to take it multiple times. So just something to keep in mind if you're thinking like, well, how can we get our numbers up?
Yeah.
That's gonna be one of the ways that we would have to do it.
We have a fair amount of families with 3 or 4.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's gonna be hard. Okay.
Right, exactly. And then elevating educators is the third component on our equity journey continuum. And just so you know, the things that play a role into that are administrator and student demographic comparisons. So how does our student demographic compare to our administrator demographic by race and ethnicity? It also looks at teacher experience and student comparison. So are students getting, are all of our students being provided access to teachers who have had 4 or more years of teaching experience? It also looks at teacher evaluation compared to the students. Are all students being taught by proficient and excellent teachers, regardless of their race or ethnicity? And then it looks at the educator and student demographics. How does our educator demographic compare to our student demographics in terms of race and ethnicity? And that's actually the thing that brought us down 0.08 of a point. So nothing huge, and we know that we're working on that. That's part of goal 3, our diverse workforce goal. So it's something that we continue to work on in our district.
So even when you go to the state report card, this is all you see.
Yes.
So where did you get all of this information?
All that information is on the back end for districts to see, but the public end, this is all you
There's
see.
no- Okay, so
Right.
that is not intended to be public ever?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, it's for districts to work on and to address and to look at how can we grow, just like I was explaining the different ways we need, the different things we need to work on.
Okay.
But it's not made public. The only thing the public can see is exactly what's up
Okay,
there.
but they break all that down. You don't have to go fish and find it.
No.
It's broken
Yep.
down for you. It's
So
just
those
not
arrows that
public.
are there,
Yeah.
I just click on those arrows, it drops down everything I need.
Okay. Oh, okay. Because I
Yes,
tried clicking
but
on
you
those
don't-
arrows and
yeah,
nothing
no.
happened, so.
Because that's just a screenshot.
Well, this is, yeah, but on the, like I was trying
on
to
the,
click.
is it, are the arrows on the public one also?
Well, not the drop-down arrows, but there's like the dot where you are on the
Yes,
line. I was hoping
yes.
I could click something and it would tell me more about it, but it's
No.
just that. You don't even have the numbers up here, so I appreciate the.
Oh, you
little
don't
bit
get the
of-
numbers on the public view
It's
either?
just a line and then we have a dot in the middle of it, so
Well,
it was really pretty
there's our
useless to me, so.
Are they concerned about giving too much data to people and people abusing it?
Yes, yes.
I
I mean,
can
because
see
it
that.
is sensitive information
And that's
as
why
well,
It's
right?
getting into that level
Mhm.
of sensitive, so I could see that.
Yeah.
And this is not, you have our district, but you do not have other districts?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can only see the public-facing side of other
Correct.
districts.
Okay.
I can appreciate the sensitivity, but I wish there was a little bit more.
Absolutely, right? Yes, I understand that. So, were you about to ask a question?
There is sort of a wealth of data that you can find on the Illinois report card website, where it's an Excel file that you can download, and it basically gives you the growth and the achievement by demographic and by school and by district. It's for somebody who is very, very interested in data.
But then you would have to
But
analyze that.
The
data on your
information is
own.
there,
It's
yeah,
not-
but it's not as in slide, it's more consistent with information that she has with the lookalike peers
Yeah.
than it would be with the equity journey continuum data.
I clicked through a bunch of this, like all of this. I didn't see a spreadsheet. I'll go back and look again. All right. Thank you.
I always go through the district side, the back end of it, so
Mhm.
I've never seen that spreadsheet either.
I just went to public facing.
So now I'm kind of wondering where that spreadsheet is. I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
look myself.
In all of the academic progress, I mean, all these are broken down and you can really dig into it, but it's hard just clicking through all the visuals, so I'll definitely see if there's a way to do that differently. But, okay.
So you can find all school report cards at illinoisreportcard.com, and the information on all the school report cards are academic proficiency and growth on the state assessments, 8th graders passing Algebra 1, which is a 9th grade standard, the equity journey continuum results that we just talked about, district environment data, demographics of both student, teacher, and administrators, and then accountability ratings. So let's talk about accountability ratings. The summative designations are comprised of ELA growth and math growth, which make up 50% of the designation. 15% of the designation is made up of math proficiency and ELA proficiency. 5% is made up of science proficiency for those 5th and 8th graders. 5% comes from the English learners progress to proficiency data from the access testing. 20% of it is from chronic absenteeism, and 5% is from the climate survey, and that's from the student participation rate for the climate survey. So this is our District 96 report card, snapshot of the report card. If you went to illinoisreportcard.com and you pulled up District 96, this is the first thing you would see. And then you would be able to click on different things to learn more about any of those areas I just talked about. On here, it shows you growth for IAR, 52% of our students. So growth is figured out by students' average growth percentile. So the state takes every student and looks at their percentage of growth, and then they average it out for each student at every grade, at every school, to figure out the grade levels growth percentage, to figure out schools growth percentage, to figure out the district's growth percentage. So you can see 52% for ELA, 55% for math. One of the things I'll explain is that, or I'll say is that you can have high growth but low achievement. So that's why when we talked about the KPIs for our strategic plan, we're looking at MAP growth but not IAR growth, because we could shoot for 75% growth in ELA and math, but that's not necessarily always impacting your achievement. Because if you're starting with lower achievement, you're just going to, you could continue to have low achievement. Then you can also see our chronic absenteeism is at 15%. And then you also see the expenditures. We had 1 school that was rated exemplary and 4 schools that were rated commendable. To be rated exemplary, you have to be in the top 10% of all the schools in the state of Illinois with what's called an index score. So they take all those components from this wheel that I showed you. They take all those components, they figure out, they do their calculations, and if anybody is ever interested in that, we can make an appointment and I can walk you through it all, but it would be too long and too boring to talk about at the table. But they do all their math calculations, and then you get what's called an index score, and they put all the states in order of their index scores. The top 10% are exemplary as long as your subgroups do not go. The top 10% are exemplary, the bottom 5% are the lowest ranking, which I don't know off the top of my head. Probably should, don't know it.
Is it targeted or is it even?
Well, they added a new one this year that's like intensive, yeah.
Comprehensive and intensive.
So if you're at that bottom 5%, they take that number, that index number for the top school of the bottom 5%, and if your subgroup scores go below that number, then you can't be exemplary. You can't even be commendable. You will end up being targeted.
Can you say that
Yes,
criteria again?
I can. So they put everyone in order. Top 10% they look at as exemplary. But then they look at the subgroups that the schools in the top 10% report. And if your subgroup index score, because then they look at all of that for every subgroup also. So if your Hispanic students perform their index score, when you look at all of that, if their index score is lower than the index score of the top school in the bottom 5%, then that school can't be exemplary.
Of the whole school or of the Hispanic subpopulation?
The Hispanic subpopulation.
Okay, so you're comparing subpopulations to subpopulations, not subpopulations
No,
to
subpopulations to their whole school.
To
I'm
the
sorry.
whole, so
Yes,
it is to the whole school.
Yes,
So if
yes.
any of our subpopulations are below the entire school benchmark, then it
Yep.
cannot be, okay.
Yep. Yeah. And I say
It's a
that just to
weird way
say,
of
because
that.
there's a neighboring district what district that I collaborate with often, who called me and said, my school's in the commendable range, but they're not commendable, we're targeted. Can you help me figure out why? And we were looking into it, and that's what we figured out, what we learned. The whole school should have been commendable, but they had a subgroup whose index score was below that bottom 5%, and so they were dropped to targeted. So it's not just looking at our whole school on these indicators, we have to also watch our subgroups too.
Which is the whole point.
Absolutely.
That is,
Yeah.
that this is
can I say this, No Child Left Behind. I mean,
Yes.
it is, nobody gets to drop out.
Exactly.
Thank you.
So it's not just exemplary, that's for every single category. If you fit into a category, but your subgroup is worse than one of the bottom 5, then you automatically get knocked down?
Yeah. So our exemplary school, if they had a subgroup that reported lower, they wouldn't be exemplary. But,
Or if any of our commendable schools had
Exactly.
one
Right.
subgroup, then they would automatically be knocked down to targeted.
yeah.
Okay.
So, our exemplary school did not have subgroups that were low. Neither did our commendable schools.
What is
Everybody.
the thought process behind, what is that supposed to achieve?
On what?
What about knocking a school down for one subgroup? Like, what is that supposed to draw attention to? What is the purpose of that?
It seemed to
It's-
me that, that if you have a subgroup that's being neglected, then it's an incentive for you to put some attention to that group to bring them up.
Oh, we're assuming people are not doing that? Okay.
People are not doing that somewhere,
Yeah.
Or you just had.
Because to your point, that is the whole point of this, is to make sure all of your subgroups are getting equal, and that's where the equity thing comes from.
But if you're just looking at your whole school and you're like, oh, we're good,
Gotcha.
we're fine, we're exemplary, because it doesn't ding you like
Yeah.
that, then there are kids who are
Okay, 'cause then
getting,
you're just gonna push it off and
Right.
ignore it. Okay. All right, that's fair.
But the issue is then if you had a group that just didn't do well for no fault of their own,
Right.
then
Yeah.
you got knocked down by a category just because.
right,
So that's probably the
a
harder thing.
double-edged sword.
That's hard.
Yeah.
That's the harder thing to stomach.
mm-hmm.
So what school is the exemplary, and is that track with what we've seen in the past? Because it seems to me like we always have one or two that are exemplary, but they kind of bump around some.
It is Hollywood. Hollywood is the exemplary school. And Hollywood was the exemplary school last year. I did look, so summative designation started in 2018. 2018 was when they first started summative designations. And in 2018, we had 3 schools that were exemplary. 2019, we also had 3 schools. And then there was no data for 2020 or 2021 for designations. And then we came back to designations in last year, 22, which is Hollywood, and then 23, which is Hollywood.
Do you get the sense that for the schools that have fallen from being exemplary to commendable, that we have a sense for why that is, or is it because we have subgroups within those schools that haven't that are being left behind?
So I don't feel like our subgroups are being left behind, but they are performing not at the level of their counterpart peers, right? So Hollywood and those subgroups are figured into the index scores. So if you have subgroups that are reporting, they're going to have to report at a certain level to continue to keep a higher index score. And it's possible. It's not that it's not possible. It's just, it is harder, right? Hollywood reports for males, females, and white students, where compared to Hauser, that reports for all subgroups, so children with disabilities, Hispanic, EL, low income, all the races except for American Indian, Asian Pacific. So Hauser has to make sure all of their subgroups are performing at this higher level to get their index score up above that 10% line. What I will say is, all of our schools, even though one's exemplary and 4 commendable, all of our schools are very close in range. It's not a far spread. It's not like someone's index score. I don't think, and I should have calculated this, but I didn't. And you can on the public page see it yourself. Our scores are not a huge chunk away from each other. I wish I had calculated the number, like 10, 15, maybe 20 points away from each other. For those that have access to the school report card page, when you go to the accountability button and summative designations, it pulls up a picture of a schoolhouse. And if you click on the commendable score on that picture of the schoolhouse, it will show you where that school falls along all the schools in Illinois. So, so you could go and you could see where all 5 of our schools fall and see their index number. It gives you that index number I keep talking about, and you can see then what the difference is between Hollywood and whichever school had is the lowest of the commendable ones.
And within that index score, do you at least have access to see, what is making up that index score, where
I do.
certain schools are?
Yep.
performing.
That's where I said if you want to sit and talk about calculations, I can talk about them until I'm blue in the face, but you don't want to sit here till 10 o'clock at night.
No.
So, but yes, I have access to every last detail from the very, like, it goes through 4 steps. It takes the raw data, turns it into one type of score, turns it into another score that becomes your index, or weighted score that becomes your index score. So it goes through like 4 chains to get to the index score. So some of our successes. We have a lot of success in District 96, but just a few. All 5 schools received a rating of exemplary or commendable from the State Board of Education. All of our grade levels continue to meet or exceed the NWA math and reading growth projections. And overall, our IAR proficiency has grown in both reading and math since the spring 22 administration. And I think it's important to point that out because, again, we are focused on math. We know math is lower than our ELA, and we know it's not where we want it to be as the educators in District 96. But it's important to note that we are still growing in math, and we continue to increase in our score. Areas for continued focus, we want students to exceed their map growth projections. We don't want to just meet it, we want to exceed it. We're going to put a specific focus on identified MAP and IAR areas so that we can look at increasing achievement scores, especially in the area of math. And we'll continue to focus on opportunity and equity gaps as we work to address the equity journey continuum data. And so some of the next steps to achieve that is that, again, we'll continue our focus on equity and opportunities in all areas, which is part of Goal 1 of the strategic plan. We'll continue our Tier 1 support, continuing to work on small group instruction, kindergarten through 8th grade. And then we want to continue supporting our English language learners as we are seeing an influx of English language learners enrolling in our school district, as well as a number of those students are newcomers. So they speak limited to no English as they're coming into the schools as well. So we want to continue to support our teachers as they're supporting those students, but also supporting the students and families as well. We're going to look at a continuous refinement of the MTSS process. We have been working on that for the past few years, continue to work on it. We see great progress, but there's still work to be done. We will do building and grade level data analysis of the IAR to determine specific areas of focus for instruction and prioritization. We'll do an ongoing analysis of our subgroups to determine the appropriate supports for various subgroups. We need to finalize our elementary science curricular resource this year, because as you probably saw in the science data, while I think we were 3rd along our lookalike peers, our score is dropping in science. And so part of that's because of the lack of consistency in science instruction from grade to grade and school to school. So we need to have a resource decided by the end of this year so that we are implementing science consistently. And then building and district leaders are going to continue to collaborate to address individual attendance concerns. The chronic absenteeism rate has increased. We were 14% last year, 15% this year. You have talked about it at the board table. We know attendance is something that we're all looking at, but it's also something that's it's really truly is an individual case-by-case situation where there are a variety of reasons why students aren't coming to school, and as a school district, we're looking at how can we support our families and our students to get them in the building. And so with that, I appreciate your time and your attention, and if you have any questions, please let me know.
If we can go back to page 13, that's where we're starting to look at the whiskey peers versus geographic. So I'm wondering, it sticks in my mind, I could be wrong, I have nothing to base this on, but it sticks in my mind that at least coming out of the pandemic in regards to the whiskey districts, we were doing, we were better than the median, I guess. What sounds like the whiskey district, we're kind of hovering around the middle of the pack. And
You mean, sorry, having kids enrolled during the pandemic?
no,
or you
in
mean the
terms of growth,
academics?
in
Okay,
terms of
okay.
academic
Okay.
growth. So, and it just sticks in my mind that was the case, that at least in the initial period coming out of the pandemic, that we were tracking as good or better, perhaps maybe again, I shouldn't quote statistics because I have nothing to base it on, but roughly the top third as opposed to the top half. And I'm wondering if that has come down, or is that always where we were, essentially roughly in the middle of the whiskey
It
pack?
looks like we were roughly in the middle of the whiskey pack when I look at that, because that's going to be that center bar, the 2021 bar. And so it looks like we're still roughly in the middle. And just kind of eyeballing it and counting as I eyeball it, and I think there were about 6 or 7 that their middle bar looked at or higher than ours
So.
for ELA, and then we could
Yeah.
So
eyeball math.
for okay, so for the districts that we're tracking below, is that more of an expenditure, a student expenditure difference that would account for some, at least some of that, or is it something else?
The ones who were below us?
No, the ones that are above us.
Oh, the ones that are above us? Do you want to explain that? You explain it a little bit better than I do. I can, but
Well, I think it's a combination of factors. I don't think it's
sure.
any one. I think it's interesting to look at what do we spend on a student. Some of them are also much smaller populations, so even though it might look like they're spending a lot more per student, we were just talking even yesterday with Marlo about, like, you look at Hollywood School as an example. I know you're asking about outside the district, but there's a principal there, there's a school secretary there, there's a nurse there, there's things that from a per pupil, Hollywood costs more money, costs us more to educate a student there. So when you look at some of the districts, and we know which ones these are, but some of them have very small enrollments. Now, that can just make you more sensitive to kind of that cohort effect too. So hard to say if that's a good or a bad thing, but I think it does give you pause to say, is there something instructionally that they are doing that costs more money, extra services or something that we should attend or attune to? It's a good question. I know we were just talking today with our leadership team, identifying the districts that have exceeded their pre-pandemic proficiency level, and it's on here on the bar charts. And that's a small number of districts. We're just looking at ELA. I think it was 3 or 4.
it's 4 of them.
And Angela's like, I'm going to call their director of teaching and learning, right? Call their assistant superintendent. Was it a new curriculum tool? Was it some new program they added? Again, it's almost never one single thing.
Sure.
But I think it's worth the examination.
Well, I guess, Butler's the classic example of small enrollment, high tax base. And I don't know where they're on this, but I would assume they're one of the higher bars.
And it might be alphabetical.
Maybe, that
Well,
might.
it might not even be on here, because I noticed you have 16 districts listed on the prior slide, but only 8 comparisons. So is that just to kind of randomize it so we can't figure out who's who?
The lookalike ones are not the whiskey
They're
districts.
all the whiskey districts are here. There's
Yes.
6 I was just
So the geographic peers have all 16 of them.
And for the lookalike peers, are those,
Yeah, you've got 6.
you said that cohort was selected for you by some filter that you put on the site?
Yes.
It wasn't something that we self-selected?
No.
So you have 16 districts listed on the West Suburban Consortium page, but when I look at the lookalike graphs, you've only got 8.
Because that's the
So
so the lookalikes are the
demographic
ones that
lookalike.
are kind of they're
That's
not
not all of
virtual, they're not
whiskey.
fictitious, they're real
Okay.
districts, but
Right.
matched for that enrollment, expenditure, low income number.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
so
none of
that's-
them are
The
whiskey.
geographics are the whiskey districts.
Go back
Okay.
to the geographic, and those are whiskey.
I was putting those together. I should not put those together.
No, you
Okay.
should not.
I mean, because when we look at the geographic, and we use that whiskey geographic peer group for a number of factors, they are close, they are geographic peers, they are close neighbors. They are school districts that you may know other families that have made a decision to live there, or we have staff from there, we compare salaries, so we use that as a valued comparison group. But you are talking about a district with 465 students, you're talking about another district much larger, you're talking about that huge range of expenditures, so that,
And diversity.
and diversity, and that tighter lookalike peer is really that, like, here are districts that are spending about the same, right? Here are districts that have that same low income number, everything that was already pointed out tonight. But that's, to answer your question, Dan, like, are there programs, are there services, is there something, do they have a different staffing ratio, is there something different that they're doing? You kind of make an assumption that they're probably doing some similar kinds of things with a similar student body and similar expenditures. And that's why I think the lookalike peer becomes such an interesting comparison group.
And I totally support that.
Yeah.
Because just,
It
I mean,
makes
when
sense.
you look at I did not realize how much diversity there was across the geographic. I mean, school enrollment is an order, it goes from 400 to 5,000.
Yeah.
That's hugely different look at the district.
Right.
And then pick another number, and low income is 0 to 58%.
Yeah.
That's also
Yeah.
a big change in what the school population is like. So, yeah, the look-alike makes a lot more sense, and I realize you're kind of trying to keep it tight, and that's a reasonable comparison. That's really all I'm trying to say, so.
And how do we do per pupil cost? Is that operating budget? Is that?
It's
like how-
both, so
what-
that's
okay.
why there's the per pupil instructional and then the per pupil, right? Per pupil, and the instructional is what we pay for essentially our certified staff.
Okay, so just staff, materials.
Staff and materials,
Okay.
yeah, and then the operational is sort of like your whole budget divided by your number of
Which is just the
students.
pure expenditures.
Right,
It's just the whole
so
thing divided by students.
Maintenance is in there, you know, facilities
okay.
is in there,
Yep.
yeah.
Could you offer me some clarification on like the MAP fall reading achievement by cohort slide? So when we're looking at achievement percentile on the left-hand side, what does that mean? Like,
So, for instance, second grade's bar is at the 65th percentile. That means that on average, our second graders this fall scored at the 65th percentile, meaning on average, they scored better than 64% of students when it's normed. It's the MAP assessment is normed nationally, so they're scoring better than 64% of all students who take this assessment in the fall in reading in second grade at that time.
okay, and then, so our 8th grade class, when they were in second grade, it would be,
97th percentile.
they were in the 97th percentile. Okay,
And then now in 8th grade, they're at the 91st percentile.
got it. And so what do you think is the driving, I mean, that's a huge gap, right? And that's sort of, it could present challenges going forward, right, for the district. The 8th graders coming in today don't look like the second graders, right? So, or the 8th graders today don't look like the second graders, or they look like second grade. So like,
That the second
what,
grade is lower now
yeah,
than it
like
was then.
what do you think are the big factors that are driving that huge
I'm gonna
difference?
take that even a step further, because I had the same question. If you look at 7th, 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd, every year, that, like, the class before is a little bit lower, so I was going in the
Yeah.
same place.
The test is the same.
The test is the same,
Yeah.
yes.
So it's just the group of kids that we have in, or is it something else that we're not doing, or not doing as well as we were when our 8th graders were second graders?
No, I think, and, Martin, you'll have to, but if you look at second, third, fourth, we're gonna I'll call them the pandemic kids, where, Angela, you just said kindergarten, first grade, even early education kids, those are formative years. Pandemic messed everybody up, so they have a much longer road to travel, and I would say, actually, it looks fairly good, because third, look at how much they jump up. Fourth, big jump. Even fifth, you kind of see a bigger jump.
Yeah, but I think.
Over
unless
time.
Unless I'm looking at this incorrectly, this is the 8th grader's second year, right?
Yes.
Second grade?
That was second grade for them,
But
yes.
this is our 7th grader's second grade year. And this is significantly higher than that one. And then that one's a little bit higher, but then it goes back down again. Am I following that correctly?
You are following
Yeah,
it
but the
correctly.
7th grade kid didn't deal with the pandemic. The
They
7th
did.
grade in their 7th grader at second grade
So
was a pre-pandemic child.
I mean, they're all
the 8th
good.
graders were in 4th grade when the pandemic hit.
They were in 4th grade. Yeah.
Yes, the 8th graders were.
So even.
7th graders were in 3rd, and 6th graders were in 2nd. So one of the things I do need to say is that the principals have also told me that that 8th grade cohort and this year's 5th grade cohort are high achieving cohort of kids.
Okay.
So
Just in general, it's
yes,
just a group of kids that
yeah,
are.
and that's
okay.
why looking at cohorts is often good.
Yeah.
Because you can also see what cohorts might struggle a little bit more just as a group of kids moving through our educational system and what cohorts might be doing exceptionally well. But that 8th grade group has been a high achieving group. And then the fifth grade group is also, the current fifth grade group is also a very high achieving group as well. So just something to note. But part of what Joel is saying is also true, because those second, third, fourth, and fifth grade kids, like our eighth graders, when they were in preschool, when they were in kindergarten and first grade, that was life before the pandemic. And they were having different opportunities in their learning and in their socializing and in their education, that when they got to second grade, they had a different foundation than our current second, third, fourth, and fifth graders. Those kiddos, when they were in early learning in preschool, kindergarten, first and second grade, those kids have had the pandemic life. Second and third graders were in preschool. Second and third graders were in preschool. And if you remember, preschool during the pandemic, most preschools were closed.
Yeah.
So they weren't socializing. They weren't getting some of the types of academic learning that those eighth graders, seventh and sixth graders had when they were in preschool. So just the foundational skills that kids learn before they even start testing in second grade, we're kind of comparing apples to oranges. They've had different experiences.
Okay, that's fair. I think it's just a very easy thing for any district to go pandemic and then call it good. So I just want to make sure that's legit.
But also to Joel's point, I think Joel can just take over for me. It's fine. Also to Joel's point, you're right. You could just say pandemic kids and be done.
It's kind of an easy excuse.
But we do want them to grow,
right?
And that's what we're seeing, right? Third grade, there's a large jump. Now we've got them. We're working on their foundational skills. We're seeing what the test is showing us they need to work on. We're adjusting our instruction. So we want to see that growth. So you see that jump from when our current third graders were in second in the fall to this year's fall. You see in the fourth grade group, you see their jump from third to fourth.
Yeah.
Like we want to see them grow in that percentile. And that's what we're working towards.
Okay. So the way I should probably be thinking about this is as new kindergartners come in or whatever and we get back to normal life, hopefully some of those pre-pandemic normalities come back in some capacity and kids have a better foundation. And then 10 years from now, this slide, because all of our 8th, 7th, all those kids will be gone, it's almost going to look the opposite.
That would be our hope, right? Right.
If it all pans out the way we're thinking, then our chart is just going to have a different slant in a few years.
We don't want to slant.
Only time is going to tell.
Yeah.
Well, but
And
these
not
numbers
hope, but
won't.
our
The
goal,
second
right?
grade is going to be at 68 until they're out of this district, right?
Correct.
So
No,
that
and
bar
that's-
will not change. And so as we do better getting second grade to 8th grade, our chart is going to go from this to this.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And
Yes.
then we'll hopefully normalize.
Yes.
Because these numbers are these numbers.
Yes.
And so until all of these students are out of our district, we're not really going to have kind of the hopeful
Sorry, the part
normalization.
about what I meant by time will tell was that we are getting back to some sense of normalcy.
Yeah.
That's what we're working towards, but everybody still seems a little skittish on a lot of different things, and that's just a social issue at this point. But
Yeah.
Well, I do wonder, though, is any of this illustrative of a changing demographics in the district?
So I think that's a really good question. I was just, so I think one number that we could pull a 5-year or 10-year history on, and I don't have it, but we could get it, is a low income, a 5-year history or 10-year history on low income. Because my sense is that number, and again, it's not an excuse, right? But it does speak to somewhat of, that is the factors, like in that look-alike peer, that's the number. They didn't pull out all the other racial or ethnic diversity, they pulled out low income. We pulled out low income, as we know that income is a predictor of school success.
Sure.
So, and that may then speak to the other questions you've been asking, which are, does that mean more services need to be added? We were just talking about, right, Angela shared that the EL population has grown significantly. This board will be hearing more about that. We're thinking that's a great topic for the December COW meeting, and I think there will be personnel recommendations to accompany that for the future. So that's why looking at this is so important, right? It's interesting, it's helpful. It is our goal that every single one of our children do incredibly well here, that they're supported in their social emotional skills, and they're supported in their academics, and that they grow in those areas. So that's the business we're in, right? So.
At the beginning of the presentation, Angela, you made a point about how it's important to look at different data sets because they can tell you different things, and making sure that they connect, or if they disconnect, why they disconnect. And so I understand why we're using MAP and MAP is really instructive as a way to look at our growth. But like, the reality is that this report card is based on IAR growth. And so I'm wondering, like, I get what you said about how growth on IAR isn't always that informative because sometimes it can be based on what level of achievement your school is at. But like, how does our growth compare to our lookalikes? And like, when I'm looking at, you know, on the district report card snapshot, and it's saying growth IAR was 52% for ELA, 55% for math, and that we know makes up 50% of our score for these reports. Like, is that a good score? How does that compare to our lookalikes?
So I can get that answer to the board by the end of this week when you do your update, because I believe I have a chart on that, and I didn't put it in this presentation, but I think I have that, so I can share that with Martha so that she can share that with you, because I can't say it I don't know off the top of my head. And I know that that was something you had sent earlier. I don't think I quite understood what you're asking, because now that you ask it out loud, I better understand. So sorry that I didn't have it for you tonight, but I will get it to you.
Yeah, helpful. I don't want to make one-off requests to you, but if the
No,
rest
not
of the
at all.
board
And
thinks that it
I
would be
believe I already have it,
helpful
so it's
information
not.
as well,
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful for me to see.
I guess one last point, and Martha, this is taking me back to a conversation we probably had years ago, but I think when we're talking about, I think you were mentioning the 5th grade and 8th grade, or especially high achieving cohorts. Our district is of a size where it doesn't take that much of a bump in one group or another to change the looks of the graphs.
Mm-hmm. And I think it'd be way too much for this type of a presentation, but are we doing this at the subgroup level?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Making sure that like, yeah,
Mhm.
just nothing's popping out there, because you can get all the, what is this, like, the ELA and math on the proficiencies and stuff, you can get all the demographic breakdowns, but it's not gonna give us that same view, so I'm just,
Yep.
because that's our whole goal with or part of our goal with goal 1 is like
Right.
making sure all the subgroups are staying up, so. I don't think I need 100 slides going through everything.
I
just
don't think
making
you
sure
would
we're
want that.
looking at that. Yeah,
Right. And then we'd be here till 10 o'clock
Yeah.
at night. Any other?
Smiling way too much about that.
It is hard to take all the student data for the entire population, bring it to your board view, the district view in a meaningful way. So
Yeah.
thank you, Angela. I know a lot of effort went into this. And still, I mean, and great questions. There's even more that we could talk about and more that could be added, so.
And I think in the nutshell, you had your takeaways at the very end here, but like, even as I was going through it, not being an expert on this does feel very positive. It feels like we're in a good position. It feels like we're growing. It feels like the opportunities we've already identified are what are standing out here. So it's not like anything new, like, oh man, I can't believe we didn't see that. So like, this feels good, and we know we have improvements to make, but it feels like we're on track, and we are achieving better than other districts generally. And then I think going back to Dan's question, that was the first thought I had, is like, everybody that's better than us, what are they doing different? So anything you can figure out there would be great. But
And to your, it feels positive, we are growing, we are, like, nothing came as a surprise. It really is a team effort, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my colleagues, just, you know, the cabinet level colleagues, administrators, Don, Jim, Nora, for their support throughout everything, and supporting our principals who just support our staff members, April and Chris at Hauser, Kasmira and Pete, who are here tonight at Blythe and Central, and then Todd and Kim wanted to be here, but both are sick from Ames and Hollywood. I can't do my, no, right? I can't do my job, and I can't share this great information without the wonderful people I work with.
well, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Stephanie in the drop, right? I don't see her.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, she's
I'm still here.
just making sure you don't have, you
She
have
had
questions.
questions.
Thank you. Thanks for checking in. No, some of my biggest questions were addressed. throughout the presentation, the equity journey continuum, kind of some of the areas there to make improvements. It sounds, outside of the essential survey, like we have some actionable items that we can take to try to make inroads there. And then one of the other questions was just, I was having a hard time hearing Selena, so I'm not sure if she asked it already, just the index, or it looks like a pie chart, but the index and the different percentages that make up the algorithm for that index. I had just been curious if that's changed significantly over the years, outside of the addition of the science piece. And I think what I had been most interested in was just the chronic absenteeism. Like, are they putting more weight on that in recent years? Had it been weighted less heavily in the past? But again, you might not have that available tonight.
I do.
So that was more.
I do have it available. Since summative designation started in 2018, that pie chart has remained the same throughout the course of time. So it's always been 20% for chronic absenteeism. The percentages have always been the same for that chart. The only difference is following the pandemics, the 5% for science wasn't proficiency, it was participation. Following the year after the pandemic, but then they've moved it back this year to proficiency.
Okay, well, thanks so much for getting that answer. Yeah, that was, I recall last year you presenting and mentioning the science percentage that it would now play, but I didn't realize that the others had stayed stagnant since this new type of measure was put in place. So
yes,
just interesting. No, that's it. Thank you. And I think Martha knows this. I'm just for the board. I do have to pop off and leave. Unfortunately, I wanted to be part of the fees conversation, so maybe I can just circle back later with folks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Angela. All right, so Dave's not here either for Finance Committee. I'll have Jim come up for the tax levy, and then for the school fees thing, I'm just gonna make a quick, I talked to Dave before we got here, make a quick comment on that. We're gonna bring this one back up for a, Dave wanted to facilitate a discussion around this, more of a philosophical discussion. So we got the stuff in here for us to look at, if there's any questions or anything, but we'll have a more in-depth conversation with Dave's here next month, or at least that's the plan. So Jim, tax levy stuff, take it away.
All right, I want to present the 2023 tax levy. We'll need to approve it and get it filed by the end of December. Oh, probably gonna go that way. There we go. In May of 2022, there was a new provision added that added to the school code that mandating the annual disclosure of our fund balances. So every time I do the budget or audit or the tax levy, I'll be bringing these up. One interesting thing about the provision, it doesn't say what date to use when you talk about the fund balances. So I thought the more I tell it, the better. To me, an obvious one is to go with audited ones that we got a third party's opinion on. So FY22, which is the last audit we got, we had a balances just under 80%. And what we've calculated before the auditors looked at this past June 30th is 68%.
And the reason for the drop there being essentially the expenditures on facilities for the most part?
Correct, yeah, the transfers to capital and then. 86% of our operating revenues come from property taxes, so that's by far the biggest source. Tax levy drives where most of our revenue comes from. So the purpose of the levy extension and collection is to somehow take all the property values in the district and turn it into revenue. Yeah, so the levy is the amount we request, and here's the last three. We requested 27.3 million, 28.7 million, and the one I put together for this year, 30 million.
Jim, quick, do you know what the split between state and federal is by chance?
How much percent?
Yes.
I'll get it.
And if, yeah,
I
I don't,
think
if you don't have it memorized, then,
It's mostly state, but
oh, it is, okay.
yeah, I'll get it for you.
I know that every year there's like that much federal stuff. So
I wasn't sure,
Yeah.
thank you.
With the ESSER, it went up a little bit.
That helped, yeah, but-
But that's,
Sure, but
we're
that's a
done with that.
one-time only.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Sure.
Sorry to break your train of thought.
oh, no problem. The extension then is the amount of revenue that gets approved by the county clerk, and which it eventually turns into the tax bills. So, you can see in 2021, they gave us a little bit more than we asked for because there was new property added, and when they put that onto the rolls, you can tax that at the same rate. And same thing in 2022, and we don't know what they'll do with the one we send in this December, but, you know, history says it'll be a little bit higher as long as there's some new property that they're taxing. And of course, the number that really affects how we operate is how much of that we collect and gets transferred into our bank account. And that has averaged about 99.5%. So we're almost get all of it. And over time, we might get some late. We might get some from 5 years ago, finally. So eventually it gets very close to 100%.
So it's looking like though, if the difference between the years, we're seeing a bigger percentage-wise increase than previous. Looks like we're going from a little over 1 million to a little under 2 in difference, you know, in the raw of what we're asking.
yeah, well, we went from 1.4% to a 5.2, and now we're gonna ask for another 5. Because you can only get CPI, but inflation's been
Right.
so big, I think, is that what's really, I'm
So-
assuming that's what's driving it?
And as you go across and they get bigger,
Yeah.
that's CPI. But if you go down, like from what we asked to what they give us, that's gonna be how much new property was added. So in 2021, it looks like $437,000 of new property was added. And then 2022, 3 times that was added, so 1.2 million. So at the $5 rate or 5 per $100 rate, that's why that one's a little more of an increase than the time before. And we don't know what the new property will be on this. It may be a lower number. If there's none, then it should look like the same number
Same number as
as we asked.
above,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, so it's not, so it's more than just,
Just the CPI, yeah.
okay.
It's CPI, that's what we've
That's
always, that's what
it's
we've
the
been
biggest
doing.
piece by
Yeah.
far, the
So
increase.
I just read the article that, I think it was Brookfield asked for like 6.1 or whatever, and then it said to account for any new construction, and I was confused by that. So, because they're not gonna get more than 5, right? Because that's state law,
So you-
but
you-
that,
That's on what exists already.
5% on
gotcha,
existing.
okay.
Which is-
And so a new property would get the 6.1, but the
Yeah,
existing
rate, yeah.
property is capped at 5? Okay, so then there's that, that's, okay, all right.
Yeah, so the new
I should
property
really
would be
understand
at the
taxes
same
better than I
rate.
do.
And it's on the money we're asking for. So
Yeah.
it's 5% on the our existing budget essentially, and then if you add in that new property, that's a whole new set of revenue that we are receiving.
Like $5 on the $100.
Yeah,
So
but
really small
it
amount,
does
but-
not affect, basically, that new property does not, it's extra over what we normally could ask for.
Okay.
I don't know how well I
So
explained
now to
that.
get it.
No,
on-
I think
to
that
get
makes
it on the
sense.
rolls.
So we're asking for 5%, or you are
Yes.
recommending we ask for 5%. That's the discussion that we're having.
Mhm.
And we will get, just to make it easy, we'll get 5%, but new properties could actually add on top of that more than just a
Correct.
5%. We could get a little bump
Yes.
with new construction.
Yes.
Okay. That's the part that I wasn't accounting for.
There's some towns that would make a big difference.
When
but here, there's
Costco
not a
came
lot.
around, that was a big deal.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah,
So for example, in the board pack, he shows that the actual extension increase in 2022 was 5.29%.
Yeah,
yeah. a little bit
and that's
more than
because
we
of new
asked for.
construction. I was trying to figure out how we got to that 2.9. Okay.
So in terms of though what we're asking or the recommended being 5%, and speaking of not understanding taxes, I remember our business manager at the time when I was coming on the board, I believe at some point in a previous history, a board had not asked for the highest available recommended increase, and
Right.
as a result, it would seem to be a loss of revenue from that point going forward, and therefore, it always makes sense to go for the maximum that's allowed.
Right.
And I've explained it, and I can kind of explain it to myself, and it sort of makes sense, but I still waver on that sometimes. Does that truly make sense?
And that was 2013,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the table that you provided.
Right, so if you
can s-
lose out on
the actual
$100,000,
the actual
you'll always
extension-
lose on that, plus its growth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if you remember this as clearly as I do, Martha. When we went to that, what was that conference thing that you and I went to? And we had the state representatives up there, and there was the one gentleman.
An Ed Red
Ed
workshop,
Red.
yeah.
There was one gentleman, I want to say he was from Arlington Heights, I feel like, is where he was a state representative. I don't think he was a senator. But he was very adamant with the audience, packed room, that that is not the mentality that any municipality in this state should have, because the Republican Party had fought very hard to essentially undo that, so that if in this year we said we only need 2.5, that municipal or governments don't get penalized. If next year you need 4, you could still ask for 4, and it doesn't sound like, I don't really know how all that works, but he was very adamant, like that thought process is not the way the state is run anymore, but it seems like most of the business managers feel like it still is, so I don't know what the right
Well, I
answer is.
feel I'm advocating for the school district. I'm also a taxpayer in Arlington
Yeah,
Heights, but
okay.
I might take the other side there.
Yeah.
I think the way that I just think is a good way for us to think about it is every year our expenses have increased, right?
Mhm.
And in most cases, we should assume that they increase by about CPI.
Yeah.
Now, in the case of, I don't know if y'all have been following the news, but in the case of a lot of these union employment negotiations that are coming through, I think that there could be a real impact on our negotiations in the next few years, and for us to not go and get the full amount that we're capable of getting this year might actually really have an impact on us in years ahead as we renegotiate contracts. It just, in this post-COVID world, not only is inflation, but unemployment, it really across unionized and non-unionized labor, there's just a lot more bargaining power on the side of labor than there has been. And so rather than to think about it as, let's just take it because it's there, I think we need to take it because we're gonna need it.
Not just for that, but many other things, so I agree with you.
Well, and to that point, and I agree with everything you just said, if you look at there's a history of CPIs used. 2021 was 7%, 2022 was 6.5%. So even when we're asking or receiving 5, in that CPI conception, if all our expenses increased by 7%, we only got 5, we're falling behind to some degree, or we could be. Now, more of it depends on the contracts, and since we employ people, that's primarily where our revenue goes, so.
And I want to say this would have been last school year, maybe springtime. I remember you saying, Jim, like, we don't use as much fuel as other districts.
Yeah.
Like, there was a lot
So
of
it
things where
depends
we
what's
weren't being
driving it.
as impacted, which is good. So we have a little bit of a buffer there, but labor is our biggest piece of it. Was that like 80-85% of our budget?
And energy is,
Yeah, it's all kind of,
that's a volatile item, and.
Yep.
somebody's delivering everything to us, I guess.
Perhaps that would be interesting to note, and I'm sure it's been provided on a different report, spoken of on a different night, but when we're looking at this, because as you're mentioning, yes, we're only getting we're capped at 5%, and it would seem our expenditures would be growing higher than that on an annual basis. But you probably would have the luxury to be able to calculate that, I would guess, on how much our expenditures are growing every year.
I look
Year
at
to
the
year.
pieces of the CPI and
Seeing how we're comparing, how much our expenses are growing compared to CPI, are they truly growing the 7% or whatever the CPI will end up being this year.
Like relative to the
Right.
different buckets of goods that they put into it? Not the holistic one, but like the different components? that
Well,
go
just
into
what,
it?
Just
what
in
our actual
total.
results are, what, you know, how much their expenditures grow from year to year, if that's something that can be, you
Yeah.
know, calculated within
Yep.
a reasonable, a good comparison year, and maybe the current year obviously is not going to work, but,
Well, let's find out.
oh, okay,
Yeah,
fair
maybe,
enough.
maybe there's a big gap, and we expect a big gap. I can do that.
I guess, yes, as a taxpayer here myself, but then also, yes, realizing that we've asked for 5% and we're, you know, if we go back to the well for another 5%, at some point, it would behoove us to have some justification to say, we're doing this, this is the reason that we're doing this, that we're not in an environment where we were asking 3% every year.
Mhm.
Yep.
Well, the budget is that we always sort of live within our means, right? And so, if,
Right.
you know, we can buy $28 worth of pencils this year, you know, maybe next year we're not buying as many pencils, because the metric really that is used nationally is CPI, so
Mhm.
I think that
I
that's
don't
a pretty
know-
good assumption for how our expenses.
It possibly is, I
If we
guess,
bought the
but
exact
I'm
same
interested.
things year to year, that, I don't know how much it'll tell us, but it'd be interesting, we can look
Yeah.
at it. We also have a strategic plan goal to never increase our expenses, never budget higher than CPI.
Mhm.
So this last budget, we increased by 4.5%, but CPI was 5. And then hopefully we spend under budget. Depends how many pipes we have to replace.
We are gonna talk about pencils in a few minutes, but it's really what equals we just put in.
The wood's cheap, it's the plastic. That's right.
This is a checklist we go through every year in the schedule for completing the levy. CPI was published last January, and tonight we're starting with the initial levy. That's the 2 check marks. The hearing and approval is scheduled for the December board meeting. I put November, but it's gonna have to be December. I'll fix that. And then it has to be filed by the last Tuesday in December, so December 26th, and hopefully they're open that day. The green up there is for the previous one, so as we're looking to, we get the CPI in January, that March, we're starting to receive payments from the previous year, so it's kind of 2 or 3 going on at the same time, I guess. As we're working our way through these milestones in blue, we can get the funds from 2022, and we'll get a finalized extension for 2022. So you get your initial tax bill, that's 55% of your previous one, because they don't know the final extension yet. And when that's done, then everyone kind of trues up their bill. And within a couple of weeks after we file this one, we should get the next CPI.
Is the county gonna be back on their normal schedule for this? No.
No,
No.
I kind of went with the standard schedule, but they're off a month here. They're delaying the due dates.
Okay, so it's not just the December delay, but the spring will be delayed too?
Right, I
Okay.
think so. So these are the,
That's not gonna have any impact on us, right? Like, we got plenty of cash, we're not worried
Right.
about the cash
Yeah.
flow,
Good
so.
fund balance.
Right.
That, honestly,
'Cause I
the
gotta
fund,
imagine
the
some
fund, the
districts are
fund
struggling with that.
balance is what lets us have a certain amount of flexibility
Yeah.
when the county can't get those bills out on time.
Yeah,
We don't have to
Then
go
once they-
short-term debt or anything like that.
once they get them out, then a lot of them are paid by mortgage companies, so
Yeah.
it comes
Mhm.
in right
Mhm.
away,
Yeah.
which is nice.
but they're not paid until the county asks for it.
Yeah, right.
So-
You have to- I'm
Because
sure they
not
set
paid
that
until
date.
the county asks for it.
Right.
December 1st, right?
December 1st, yeah.
This came in the mail today.
Yep, mine too, yeah.
So the
It's
last
in your mailbox.
The last 4 years of CPI are up here, 2019, it was 2.3, in 2020, it was 1.4. 2021, that's when we jumped up to 7%. And then last year, it was 6.5%. And the one that's not complete there is the current year. So through September, which is the latest numbers we have, it's at 3.6. So it's trending a lot better than the last 2 years. But I don't know if less inflation's better, I think it is. But
Okay, so then it's quite possible even if we ask for 5, we'll end up getting a lot less then,
the next time.
the
So
next
that-
time.
We're
Oh, so not
using the
this time.
6.5 right
Excuse me,
now.
yes, you're already correct. Yes.
And then if this ends up, maybe it'll end up at 4, 4.5.
But that should also let a lot of people feel better because it looks like we're getting to something more reasonable.
Yeah, I assume it'll come back down. But last 10 years, we averaged 2.6. And the last 5 years, I think we're right about the same, 2.3 maybe.
Seems like the Fed policy's finally starting to kick in a little bit, with the inflation coming down, so it's taken a while.
Right, yeah, it's kind of lagging. Any questions on the tax levy?
No, but we got into a lot of stuff here, so, your recommendation is a 5% increase, and that's what, so I don't know if there's any conversation on that. Stephanie, you've also been very quiet, so
Stephanie
just-
jumped off.
Okay,
She texted
all
me
right.
and said she had to jump off.
Okay,
us
I
now.
knew she had to go at some
Yeah.
point, so, so
Right.
that's what we're gonna be, I guess, voting on, so I guess any questions or anything around that before we get to the
No,
next meeting?
I said it before, I mean, I don't want my taxes to go up either, but I think we should, like Selena said, we should go with CPI.
And we had talked about, you could vote at the November board meeting, it has to be done by the end of December, but there, you also would have another if you want to have more discussion. So do you want to put it as an action item for November, or wait till action item in December?
December, because I gotta post it, I gotta
Okay.
publish it.
All right, gotcha.
And
Yeah, okay.
I kind of want an indication of do 5%, because I have to put the numbers in.
Yeah, as you already know, Dave is for the 5, which is why that's in front of us right now. I'm for it. Joel, you just said it. I don't know, Dan or Selena, if you've got an indication
so
one way or the other.
I'll publish it that way, and we have the hearing, and I assume it can be changed, because you're having a hearing, so.
The public can come and speak to us at the public hearing
Yeah.
about it, that's why we have this.
Right,
We-
before you
Mhm.
vote.
And we've been tried to be fairly consistent about that too, is the public gets a say if
Right,
they generally don't come here, but there's an opportunity there as well.
So for now, unless something changes, I guess if anybody here changes their mind on that before regular December meeting.
Yeah, regular December.
mhm.
I guess let us know, and then we can prepare for that conversation. But otherwise, it sounds like we'll probably go forward with this.
Great,
We could put on the December cow,
yeah. we
any
can put
additional
it as a-
discussion of tax levy if
Okay.
it needed.
Yep, all right. Cool, all right, thank you, Jim. And then, I'll just, like I noted, the school fees are in here. Dave wants to facilitate more of a conversation around this, so I don't know, Jim, if you just kind of want to go through what you set up here with Dave, just so that everybody's on the same page with thinking through this. I know Dave wanted to have more of a philosophical conversation. Last year, we started a should we even have fees conversation, so he wanted to be a part of that and facilitate it, but here, he's worked with Jim to do the second thing that we thought of was what, instead of having the variable, differing fees by year, just having kind of flat fees. So Jim, if you want to kind of walk us through
Sure.
that.
On my memo, there's 1 and 2. One is how we've done it, say, the last 5 years, I think. We wanted to come up with a routine way to do it. And so that's kind of option 1, where it goes up by CPI, but rounded to the $5. Option 2 is we kind of took all the money that would come in with all those different rates by preschool through 5th grade and took that total amount and then divided it so that it would come up with an even number for all those grades. And that would, to get the same revenue, would be $110 for pre-K through 5th grade, and did the same thing for 6th through 8. And that, to get the same revenue, would be $200, 6th through 8th grade. So we basically have 2 rates for registration fees. The 2 tables there are our supply budgets, and if we put the registration fees towards supplies, which makes sense. We're, for the elementary, we get 110 per student, but we're spending about 220 per student. And at Hauser, we spend about 257 per student, and we'd be asking for 200 per student. So it offsets what we buy for supplies, but doesn't pay for it all.
Which is what we've talked about, and we had a lot of, and save this for Dave, but we've had a lot of philosophical discussion about what exactly the fee is for, and I think this is fairly clear. It's for supplies.
Yep.
It's a contribution to supplies, shall we say.
And I think a lot of us struggled, or at least myself and I think it was Stephanie, just like, what exactly are we offsetting? And because I remember I went in, I just looked at one or two of our line items and said, let's just assume it's this. So now it's much more clear, and I think if somebody were to approach us and say, what exactly do I pay these fees for? This is what you pay these fees. So this is a lot more clear, so thank you for that.
I think it was always buried in it, but this is, like you said, a little bit more clear. It's easier to explain. It's also more, it's pretty consistent with the more individual by grade fees, so I don't think we're harming or hurting anyone there either.
May I ask why the percentage that the pre-K through 5th grade, the fee that the recommended fee covers is about 50%, and then we're asking Hauser students to cover more of their supplies expense?
I
So-
can speculate that when they first came up with these rates, if they did it this way, well before my time, that maybe the elementary expenses have just gone up faster. I don't know if it's technology related or why, but there wasn't some conscious decision that I'm aware of to do that.
If I'm speculating on a history, middle schoolers probably had textbooks that were either rented or purchased through the supply budget, so I think it's valuable to stop and reconsider all this and the balancing and kind of a flattening out by the grade levels, et cetera. So.
Yeah, and that's a lot of what Dave wanted to get into too. So I don't know. I have questions as well. I'll try not to get too deep into it without Dave here.
No,
but.
I'm fine.
And just
Stop this.
because I think that this is an area that I expect parents will sort of have something to say about, because there are some parents who are very passionate about buying their own school supplies. This eliminates parents going and buying school supplies and bringing them to school the night before the first day, right?
It doesn't, but you could do that as a separate decision.
Oh, okay.
And then we would.
It's
Well, I thought it
proposed.
said,
It's
you
That's
know,
what's being
basically his
proposed.
It was
recommendation.
being proposed. I think that's what David said, like,
Yeah.
can we just take care of the Kleenex and the
Right.
notebooks
Mhm.
and the things that you might go to
Share.
Target or purchase through PTO or, yeah.
It
Okay.
eliminates
No,
the
I buy the
shared
box
item.
that's mailed to my
Right.
house with all the stuff in it because it's a giant inconvenience, and that's what I hear the most of. So I haven't heard any passionate parents. Most of them are like, "This is annoying, and I wish it would go away."
It is
So-
annoying, it's an inconvenience, and some parts of me loves it, getting the best price for markers at Walmart, or is it Target? Gotta find out.
It's also a fundraiser for a lot of our PTOs, and I don't
Is
know
it?
how much
Okay.
money it brings.
I don't know how much that is a fundraiser or like a convenience
A convenience.
thing. I don't know either, but I appreciate you bringing it up. I know we're not having the conversation tonight, right, Wesley? Sorry.
I mean, these
Well-
are
Yeah.
these are all good questions and good thoughts. I think it was more of just like, let's get the thoughts out, let's think about it a little bit, and then we can have a deeper conversation.
But I
my
said
thought
I
are-
didn't know how much of a rite of passage and fun it is to go get the school supplies. So I think there's something to that
Maybe
Mhm.
just once.
the board
like
gets
first
to.
grade.
Well,
Yeah.
I do wonder though that it's having, having had two kids go all the way through D96 and two kids going through it now, it really seems to vary so much by teacher. And I do wonder how we're arriving at this number, and is that going to be enough, or are there going to be some side conversations or side lists of, oh, but we really need the 360 protractor for this class, which I've never used, by the way. So I just wonder, is there going to be spillover, or conversely, are we going to encourage then every teacher to spend the max of their budget every year? So thereby increasing costs that if we were doling them out individually wouldn't be as high.
I've got some ideas on how to implement this, but
Okay,
Save it for next month.
save it for next month.
I got it. Happy to. Got to leave people wanting more.
And I'll say that because I think we should start with, do we even want to charge fees? Because if we decide we don't want to charge fees, all these questions are moot.
I'm gonna say it now just because I can't help myself, but I've been adamant that there should be some contribution by the parents for this. And I know that there are other people who vehemently disagree, but I still support the idea that some contribution is reasonable.
There is a tax benefit to
Yeah.
paying fees, oddly enough.
Yep. And that's why I want to start with that question to see where we're at.
There's a personal tax benefit.
Oh.
Yes, state tax benefit.
Yeah.
All right. So much more robust conversation.
So
Like
keep that
that's my
for
tax.
December cow,
Yes.
November board.
It's just state
December.
Illinois, but
Okay.
there's a special section for it, so it's
Okay.
not
Because
like you even have to
none of this is
itemize
gonna
if
matter
you're
until
just a
next year,
parent and you
so
pay
we got
those
plenty of
fees.
time.
You just
The
did it.
reason we
Okay.
started
You
bringing
can,
fees
I mean, not
in
everybody does, but you
early
can.
was to get the early learners
Sure, she's on it.
tuition
She's a
resolved,
teacher
which we
too.
could do a separate action item, that's easy. So Nora, early learners start registering, March.
We have an information night in, I think it's might even be the last day of January though, so I think we
Okay.
tried.
I thought it was even
invite
sooner
them
than
so
that.
They could know, because it's competitive, so if they wanna register, they wanna.
Excuse me.
Could do it December.
I think we'll get it done by then.
Let's figure out when to put this on. Joel just said he's not gonna be here for December
Okay.
cow, so I do wanna make sure everybody's at the table on this particular one, so we'll figure that out with
Yeah,
agenda
sure.
planning. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks.
It's easy enough for the discussion.
All right, facilities. Mr.
Okay.
Maho.
I did not bring my notes with me. They're on my desk at work, so I apologize for that. But we did have the meeting last week.
The agenda's in
And that's what I'm using as my
there.
my reminder here. If you remember, there was a Woodside Road component to that DLA and Ramesh discussed that is not going to be included in the plans because that requires much greater coordination and discussion with the village because that would impact one of the more heavily traveled roads in Riverside.
Is that the bump out thing?
The
Yeah,
bump out,
okay.
yes. So those are the bump outs in the front of Hauser.
Yep.
They're a great idea from a safety perspective, but
Traffic problems.
that it's an additional discussion and the school district does not own that property, so it has to be a coordinated conversation. There was some discussion about, they did send the plans to the village, who's now looking at them. I'm not sure where we are with the MWRD, but I know that the village side has started. And then there was another discussion about all the pitfalls and complications of losing that green space. So that is also going to be an additional discussion with the community, whether it be a local private school or the village, to find and figure out what the best way to have a space for our children is. Did I miss anything there?
No.
Thank you. We have the follow-up items, those are just more long-term, those are smaller building improvements. The renovation up on the third floor, to change the space usage. The bathroom up there doesn't need to be as big. The central gym floor needs work, but that needs some additional structural analysis to determine exactly what can be done and what kind of reinforcing might be necessary for a slightly beefier floor system. There's nothing with it right now, but current trends in floor design are heavier. Hauser locker room, we've had that discussion before, but that's still developing. And then I think we've decided that we're deferring the library at Hauser to a more global perspective on what exactly school libraries look like in the future. And so that may actually be a future strategic plan item. And then the long-range maintenance, simply state of good repair, and that's Ames is going to have the work next summer, just on the old portion of the building. And then we have a MOU that was in progress for Blythe Park, right out here. The tennis courts, sorry, those are my words. Thank you. That is still in progress, but also the village is doing a master planning process, so there may be some additional changes in that park area that we are not yet aware of, so it's not forgotten, it's just developing, because that's also a item to be coordinated and collaborative on.
Have we gotten final determination of who owns what out here?
No,
No? Okay.
that's ongoing,
Okay.
and that's why it equally.
Is it just poor record keeping over time or something? Is that what the debate is, or do we?
I think back in the day, they wrote things on napkins. And
Yeah.
There was a lot more.
It was just not clear where the dividing lines are and stuff? or-
No, the dividing lines are clear.
Okay,
But in the past, and this is me being philosophical, there was a much more flexible approach to how things were used. And current trends are very ownership centered
okay,
and not particularly collaborative.
okay.
So my position, statement, philosophy is that we should continue to be collaborative with the village. We are generally working with the same taxpayers
Yeah.
and the same users.
Yeah.
And that is the right way to do things. And putting one's foot down either way for either entity is not a good way to go.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Questions?
I did have one question where you mentioned floors were getting heavier for this, when you're talking about the central gym floor.
The floor systems.
Okay.
So they want, now, the old floor was wood on top of probably a thinner layer and then on top of your floor beams. And now they want to have some rubberized padding in there and some kind of vapor layer, and all that stuff is heavier. So when you get to more weight, then you need to look at the existing structure to decide what exactly it can hold comfortably and whether or not you need to beef it up and strengthen underlying elements. And once you start talking about strengthening underlying elements to hold this new stuff, it gets pricier and there has to be
That's
more
what I was thinking, yes.
calculations. Yeah. It is relatively that simple.
Okay.
Anything from you?
No.
Nope.
Just
Okay.
something that's being investigated.
We're dropping like flies tonight.
Is that a degree of, or potential degree of expense that it might behoove us not to make the floor change, or is that a floor
I
change
don't
that's
think
needed?
we have a choice because from what we've been hearing is that floor is not in great shape.
Ah.
So it's an expense that's probably coming
Sand
up.
it down enough, you sand a wood floor down enough time, you're.
And if you can sand it down enough times, and then you've gone through the floor.
Yeah, I was
So
gonna say that
that's
it
an option too, but
I'm not a flooring expert, but there's some details I've picked up.
you
on.
can,
Yeah.
and all it takes is one bad move with a sander and you've gone through things that you shouldn't have. So they have a
Expensive water
limited number of
damage and-
times that
yeah,
you can
yeah.
refurbish them, is the short version.
And just to tie this back to the tax levy, a lot of expensive things on here that we need to continue to prepare for, so.
Everything is I mean, Jim, can I put you on the spot and remind me how much Blythe cost?
How much is?
Blythe, yes, please,
I
sir.
have to look it up, but I think it was about 2.5 million.
It's 2.5 million for this room, plus some work upstairs, plus a little bit of work outside.
And the HVAC.
Yeah, the new boiler.
Oh, the boiler was a big component. The boiler
was
was
like
actually, I think,
800,000?
close to 800,000. So to renovate this space is $1 million.
Yeah. Yeah. The central houser one is gonna be big. I'm anxious, not in a bad way, to see what those numbers come in at, because Ramesh sounded pretty bullish on it, but we'll see what happens, so.
There's a lot of volatility in the construction industry
Yeah.
right now. That's, I mean, we see
And those early projections from a year or two ago was somewhere between like 7 and 8 million, so we'll see what happens.
construction, concrete, asphalt, a lot of energy goes into those materials, so all you need is a bad thing to happen in, say, the Middle East.
Right at the wrong time.
And energy costs go up.
Yeah.
And then it costs you a lot more to do your asphalt parking lot. So
Yep.
just
Well, and you had the concrete shortage here recently, so hopefully that doesn't happen
Concrete.
again, and,
Selena, you mentioned labor. Construction is a lot of labor.
Yep.
It's just people doing things.
yep, just people doing things, yep.
So I'm simplifying. But it's, construction is a lot of people touching and putting things in. As efficient as they try to go, the minute you go around a curve, you've got more investment of time. And
Yep.
time is money.
All right. Anything else? Thank you, Joel. All right, Dan or Selena, nothing on the agenda? Anything that you want to bring up?
Let's see, well, as we all know here, a lot of these items are not discussable here, but some of the things we did discuss were the bridge program that the district is participating in. I think you were mentioning, Martha, earlier today that
Yeah.
we're one of a handful of districts that are participating in it
Yeah.
as a way to try to improve the pipeline of teachers to principals and principals to administrators. It's not been something that has been a top priority previous, but it's something that behooves us to put some attention to in the near term. And that sounds like we've made some progress there, and we are one of the few districts at present taking advantage of that program. So that is good that we're participating in that. Also, we discussed and had we had a good discussion of, probably an initial discussion on teacher burnout and what are some of the root causes of that. And again, that's something that would behoove us to investigate that and look into that as becoming a burgeoning problem in this profession.
Okay. If there's nothing else, then, Kathy, any public comment? No? Okay. Future meeting dates. November 15th, 2023, that'll be a regular business meeting, 7 p.m. at the Hauser Learning Resource Center. December 6th, Committee of the Whole, 7 p.m. Ames Multipurpose Room. And December 20th, regular business meeting, 7 p.m. Hauser Learning Resource Center. And then you already got ahead of us on the January 3rd canceled. I'm assuming that's going to stay canceled. We can figure that out later if not. And we don't need to
Better,
go.
I'm in Disney World.
Yeah.
It's one I know.
You dial in.
My entire time here, we've canceled it. It's usually
Actually,
during winter break.
Yeah, now that I
and,
think about it, I'm going to
yeah.
be gone too. I won't be
Yeah.
in town either, so,
Probably gonna be
okay.
canceled.
Yep, so January 3rd canceled, all right.
What's that?
Are you gonna be here or not?
No, I go back to work when the year starts, so. You'll be hearing more about that when we discuss this.
All right, okay. We do not need any closed session tonight, so this meeting is adjourned.